Hey guys, how you doing? Can everyone hear me? Is the mic working? Sorry? I did not. I got green here. Hello? That sounds good. All right. Well, good morning. Thanks for making it here and battling the haze today, as well as the road closures. I really appreciate it. My name's Stuart, and I'm the marketing director for Diageo. For those of you that aren't familiar with the company, you might be familiar with some of our brands. We're the world's largest distributor of spirits and alcohol. So we make Guinness, we make Johnny Walker, we make Smirnoff, we make Bailey's, and about 50 other brands. So it's great to meet you guys. Since it's the morning of our first session, I thought I'd start with something easy and just talk about how to reinvent marketing. What we're all feeling, and some of us are going to these conferences to kind of get addressed, is that things feel like they're just not moving forward. Every conference I'm sure you guys have attended to is talking about how things need to change. What I'd like to do with your guys' help is sort of take a step back and try to actually fix the problem with some constructive suggestions, advice, and some building blocks. So I'm hoping this is a super interactive session. I will be trying to time myself, so there's 15 minutes left over for us to take questions. So please feel free to challenge the stuff that I'm going to talk to you guys about, ask questions relevant to your agencies and stuff once the box gets repaired. I'll also be trying to address a couple of stakeholders in the room of how do agencies crack this problem, how do brands crack this problem, and how does media crack this problem. And the problem is that of chaos. I don't think we've ever lived in a time where marketing as an industry and discipline has been more complex, but the fundamentals of how marketing works remain the same as if we were in a relatively simplistic, limited channel, simplified consumer environment. And that disconnect is what I'd like to sort of challenge with you guys today. Because in a world this sophisticated that hasn't been fundamentally reinvented, that could be the reason we're all struggling. So what you're looking at here is a Stanford University model of a single 3-day Twitter conversation. This was, I think, September of 2018, so it's more sophisticated here. The nodes represent sharing intersections, and this is a 48-hour sort of period of time around one hashtag. So as we as marketers look to be part of an ever-evolving, ever-sophisticated communication strategy or world of consumers, we're going to have to start recognizing that the old approaches aren't going to take us forward anymore. And so what I'll be doing today is sort of killing a couple of sacred cows. And I'm not alone. There are a number of people smarter and better paid than me that are also saying this sort of thing, like my old boss. Even in Procter & Gamble, the world's largest consumer groups company and the world's largest advertiser, they are recognizing that many of us trying to get into digital are sometimes guilty of getting distracted by the shiny objects and forgetting how to build a strategy. And so what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is how do you build and recultivate the marketing fundamentals itself to be relevant to this new world so you know how to use these tools in ways that make sense. And the first harsh lesson we're going to have to realize about consumers that Tony was talking about is they don't care about you. They don't care about you. They don't care about the shiny new gadget you're working on. They don't care about your brand. What they care very much about is what you've got in it for them. The other lesson that we're realizing is that they live in a personal content universe. So now more than ever, advertising is becoming a tax that only the poor or the technology illiterate play. Because with the advent of ad blocking starting to endanger about 40 to 50% of ad revenue, with the increasing use of streaming on demand services, which don't have any ads if you pay a premium, you're now increasingly moving away from an environment where you can demand attention by putting money down. You're increasingly having to earn that attention and earn that attention in an ever-increasing, ever more targeted space where consumers are opting in for the content that they want and by extension, the ads they actually want to see. So that means you can't interrupt. That means you can't demand. So what you need to start thinking about is how does marketing become a value-added extension of your business's proposition? How does marketing actually become the service consumers want to opt in for when they're engaging with your brand pre-purchase, during purchase, and after purchase? So in other words, how do we become from, I think I read a statistic the other day that we're one of the least trusted professions in the world. Right after lawyers, but before used car salesmen. And to a certain extent, we've earned that because we haven't looked for ways to actually engage. We've looked for ways to manipulate, trick, and interrupt. And so if you take this approach forward and we start saying, well, we're not in control anymore of your content universe, and we know that you're not really eager to hear about our products anymore, how do we start thinking about how we can create a service that we're offering consumers at every single activation and point of our strategy that people actually would delight to engage in, would seek out? Because that's the only way brands are surviving today. Okay, so those are the harsh lessons. So we're starting with a blank page, and all of us together today are going to have to rebuild marketing from the ground up. Most of the stuff I'm going to throw up is pretty fundamental, and I'm going to throw all of that stuff out. But the stuff that still remains relevant is back to our Marketing 101 classes. The good news is this stuff is still relevant, but there are going to be some major changes to what I believe we're going to have to talk about and deal with in order to make this more model still relevant. We'll start with the who, because that's always the place to start. One of the things that I have started doing with my teams, and I encourage you guys to also do, is eliminate the word consumer from your vocabulary. It's a subtle thing, but it starts moving us out of the equation of talking about people like they're not people, and starting to talk about them as actual human beings. And when you start doing that in your briefs, in your communication, in your strategies, you start realizing how crazy some of the stuff we talk about in the industry sounds. Consumers aren't machines, they aren't robots, they're living, breathing human beings, and just like us, if we're having a conversation about people, we need to be able to dimensionalize it through a human being's perspective. So if something makes sense when you use the word consumer, but doesn't make sense when you use the word people, you've got a problem. And that's a great stress test for your strategy. But it goes deeper. One of the other sacred cows we have in the marketing industry is the persistent use of demographics: age, income, geographic location. Those are all becoming a less and less useful, relevant way to segment out your consumer if the objective is to identify people who have a particular behavior you want to tap into or change. If you're starting to look at behavior-based targeting, you're starting to look for much more of a commonality around tribes and communities. People who are in the same kind of interest space are very much more likely to do the same thing than for people who are likely of the same demographic. And a great example is millennials. We spend a lot of time in conferences talking about millennials, but the truth of it is a millennial today has every chance of either just getting into high school or getting a divorce. If you look at the actual demographic and what age group it is, most of you guys are actually millennials. But when we talk about it, we're thinking about some whiz kid with his cell phone who's 19 or 20. That's the range. It's not helpful. It's not helpful or useful when it comes to actually targeting it out. And there are 35-year-old gamers as much as they are 20-year-old gamers. But they all behave the same way and are interested in the same kind of product if you're in entertainment and gaming these days. So how do you start rethinking it? One of the things you do is you start demanding targeting solutions from your media. You start looking at partnerships that are much more oriented towards tribes and communities. The other thing you might want to start doing is if you're going after behavior, you might want to start thinking about life stages and the point of market entry for your industry as a far more useful way to target. What I mean by point of market entry is when someone sort of enters the category for the first time looking to make a decision. Because behavioral data suggests that more and more, when we get in and we're actually looking for information about a category, is the place we're most receptive to finding out about brands. A classic example in prestige skincare, an old brand I used to work for, is when people get their first job. All right, so women who are getting into their first job after college, after about a year or two, they're starting to earn big bucks. They're starting to take their skincare a little bit more seriously. The big 3-0 is approaching. It's a time where many of the people who are making their first purchase are activating. And if you take that as your targeting variable to try and influence women who are ready to spend $100 on skincare, you are talking to them when they're most interested in hearing from you, versus maybe when they're already spending a significant amount but have invested behind a brand that talked to them 5 years ago. So is your marketing targeted towards the place where people are going to find you most useful and where you're going to be more influential? Is a big, big question we need to ask. Life stages are also relevant. When you move out for the first time, you're very interested in setting up yourself, and that's where you're seeing brands like IKEA really start to focus. Or when you get married, when you get a divorce is a useful target, though admit sometimes a depressing one. All of these things are great life stages for you to orient your product around in a really logical way because you can predict someone's behavior. So both tribes and communities or life stages and point of market entry are really useful things to think about when you're trying to work out when do I talk and where do I talk to the person that I'm trying to influence. Make sense? Sort of. All right, let's move on. We'll go to what? So we've got this consumer group. We've started to think about how we're going to try and influence them. And now we want to get into what we actually say. And there are a couple of rules that I implore the industry start taking more seriously. The first and most fundamental one that we can't forget is be useful. If you aren't the best and clearest solution to the problem that you're trying to say you're about, you are never going to win. So an undifferentiated product, a product that isn't clear about exactly when and where they're superior, is always going to struggle to differentiate in today's world, which will rely on reviews, which will rely on testimonials as corroboration. So if you're going into this with a product that doesn't stand out for some reason in a way that's relevant to the problem you're trying to target, you're never going to get anywhere. And it's an important thing to remember as marketers that we're as responsible for being useful as we are responsible for adding the layer of communication around what we make. If our product is bad, the first job of a marketer is to fix the product or redefine what the actual problem we're trying to solve would be so we are the best solution. Otherwise, we're always running with a handicap. The second big rule is to be authentic, and this is another place where we need to sort of reinvigorate ourselves as human beings talking to other human beings. Authenticity and purpose has been a really hot button for marketing these days, and for the right reasons, it can be an incredible way to unlock a lot of value and a lot of consumer persuasion. But the one thing that has sort of happened as a consequence of this is we've moved into a space where we're doing a lot of purpose campaigns for the sake of having a purpose campaign. And in many cases, these are being done with a significant amount of media investment and a lot of really gorgeous creative, but when you actually get into the company, you're not seeing the walk the talk that actually makes that purpose authentic. And my rule here is if you're actually going to take on a purpose, you need to show many, many situations in your company's bottom line where you have taken a decision that is not financially profitable in order to do this purpose. A token donation, a really swanky purpose campaign is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real business decisions. And if you're not prepared to do that, that's great, but the purpose might not be for you. The second thing is to talk like a real human being and engage like a real human being, which is to say if you're a toilet paper and you're talking about how you're going to solve the political divisions of the United States, you're probably not going to get anyone with you on that journey. And this is something that I don't want to spend too much time on, but has been a massive issue for brands. And it's really, really easy to get wrong, but with the best of intentions. So obviously, how many of you guys have heard of Fire Festival? 2 of 3? Okay, 5? Okay, 5. So Fire Festival was an incredibly effective Instagram campaign launch using major influencers that was promoting a festival up in the Bahamas. It was, however, all hype and all marketing, and when actually showed up, had everyone living in FEMA disaster tents and eating pretty bad cheese sandwiches, which was all marketed around a multi-million-dollar experience. So we had incredibly rich, high-net-worth individuals and young millionaires moving to this space in order to get this really great experience that was sold to them on Instagram. Ended up being a massive disaster. 2 of the founders have gone to jail. There are documentaries available on Amazon and on Netflix that talk about this, which are highly entertaining, that I recommend you kind of talk about. But basically a lot of lies and a lot of deceptive marketing ended up completely destroying that company and also affecting the festival industry at large, which has now had to deal with this. This was one of the big triggers for the massive FTC push that you will see happening on influencers these days in terms of deceptive marketing practices. How many of you are familiar with Kylie Jenner and the Pepsi campaign? I'm seeing similar fans. You guys read the same news articles I do. So this was around about the time Black Lives Matter was trending in the United States, and Pepsi decided we want to be part of this social movement. So we'll get Kylie Jenner, who's the world's largest, sort of Instagram and influencer celebrity space. We'll get her into an ad that's going to be all about how Pepsi is part of social movements and positivity and change. If you actually download and watch or YouTube the video, it's hard to get these days, but still up on because Pepsi has pulled it. It doesn't actually engage on any particular issue, whitewashes the arguably black-white tension altogether into something that's incredibly vague and just has people holding up Pepsi signs while they protest, and ends with Kylie Jenner giving a cop Pepsi, and the cop opens the Pepsi, and everything's all right again. So it was massive backlash because it touched an incredibly sensitive issue without any kind of respect or engagement to the actual problem, and also kind of very nakedly tried to manipulate people on some pretty iconic imagery going back to even sort of the Vietnam War protests. So a massive disaster for Pepsi, millions of dollars wasted, and all because they started without a clear idea of what kind of conversation they wanted to have around purpose and why Pepsi was relevant. Dolce & Gabbana is probably a more Asian, home-strung one. They had a beautiful Chinese model trying to eat pasta with chopsticks for some reason, and it was all talking about sort of their store opening up. It resulted in a massive, the disrespect inferred and the implication that Chinese people wouldn't know to eat pasta with a fork, and just the whole tone of the copy was so tone deaf that it resulted in a boycott in China of Dolce & Gabbana, which the company still hasn't recovered from. Many people have returned, many stores had to be closed, and it's sort of persistent, at least for the next couple of news cycles. But the ways that I've seen companies get it right are manifold. The one that I haven't put up here, but is a really great example, is what Nike has done with Colin Kaepernick in terms of standing by an NFL athlete who decided to protest police brutality by kneeling during the national anthem. He was subsequently fired, so he was an athlete with no actual job in sports. Nike not only kept his contract of endorsement running, they actually featured him in a campaign. That resulted in people who were kind of fired up about the issue in the opposite way, of showing disrespect to the flag and not maybe as engaged in the sort of police brutality aspect, burning their Nikes on social media, announcing a boycott, pushing for it. The share of Nike dropped about 9%. And as a consequence, they did not take any action. They continued to push Colin as their spokesperson of the new campaign, believe in something even if it costs you everything. And the share has not only since rebounded, but actually increased as a consequence of their commitment to that cause. Because what happened was people who believed in the brand actually started advocating for it, actually increased purchases in the East and West Coast, where it's nominally blue states, and there was a massive recovery and slowdown. So commitment to a purpose, even when it costs you a lot of business and adds a lot of risk, is what the game takes when you play the purpose angle. Really quickly, Patagonia has launched ads saying don't buy our products when you can repair them, and offering repair services, which would hurt their bottom line. Chobani has actually issued major stock releases down to its employees, who are largely immigrants, veterans, and illegal undocumented workers, and making some of them millionaires overnight as a consequence of their success. Lush has spent about $16 million reinventing its product line to not contain any eggs, so they can be vegan skincare. These are major decisions that they actually put into practice that had nothing to do with their communication, but I consider it essential if you're serious about a purpose. So that's what it takes. The other thing that you can incorporate into your what that we do kind of touch upon a lot in marketing conferences is social proof. Basically, your brand is cool, and so when I'm associated with endorsing part of your brand, I become cool by extension. This is a really great way to think about it, but you have to make sure that the emphasis is not the brand is cool, the emphasis is the people who support my brand become cool by association. And so we've realized that this is something that as an alcohol company we're trying to make a bigger effort towards, because we're recognizing that alcohol has always had an intrinsic part of consumer culture and why people like to go out. And so what we've tried to do is rethink our marketing approaches away from how we do activations, how we do partnerships, where we show up in brands. What you're seeing here is the AIA Glow Yoga Festival in Singapore, which happened a couple of weeks ago. We had a fantastic turnout, I think about 7,000 people showing up to do yoga and wanting refreshment afterwards. So we created an outdoor version of Tanqueray, which is the best gin in Singapore. No joke, it just got awarded the best gin of Singapore in the Singapore Spirits Competition. Just shameless plug. We also have launched experiences. Drams in the Dark was an exclusive invitation-only tasting of whiskeys that was done with an experiential soundscape and a completely blind tasting. So people who were attending didn't know what they were going to try, and in that process were able to discover whiskeys and single malts that they didn't know they actually liked because the branding was kind of taken out. And we were able to leverage our 30 brand portfolio to sort of give that experience out to people in a very Instagrammable, we had photographers there to take photos and share content, and very kind of cool and exclusive experience that people are kind of still asking to bring back and redo. So think about how your brand experiences can make your people cool. If you're choosing a purpose, try and make sure you're walking the walk. And if you're trying to talk about something that your product does, just make sure that you're effortlessly the best at that specific problem, even if you have to narrow that problem down. Cool. The third stage, and often the place where everything falls apart, is the how. The how is where it all comes together, and the biggest thing that I can encourage you to do is to dispense with the idea of a media and creative campaign. And what I mean by that is media and creative campaigns by default are us coming up with an idea and deciding to push it out to people. It will never survive the idea of being radically recognizant of the fact that everyone lives in a personal content universe and everyone only cares about us when we're useful. What needs to instead happen is we need to start building receptivity-based, always-on ecosystems. Let me break that down because that sounds way scientific and complicated. Receptivity-based means we start first with the when and where receptive. We know that communities, we know that point of market entries, we know that there are specific moments in time where people want to hear about your product and want to be educated about it. So we start mapping that out, the when and where moments where people really would find us useful. How do we start identifying what those situations are? And you can use stories here, right? It can be when they're, like when they're hungry, or when they're when they're, for instance, in their first job and starting to get serious about skincare. What are the behaviors they'll do? They'll start searching best skincare. They'll start talking to their friends. Those kind of situations help you start living a perspective of receptivity-based. Always on is recognizing that if you're not thinking about campaigns, you don't need to throw out all your content every single year or every single season. If it's always on, some content is evergreen. If you're creating a path to purchase journey that starts with when people start entering the category, that content technically doesn't need to be refreshed nearly as often as something you're putting in front of everyone's eyeballs at scale. So as a consequence, some of your best content can actually become more extensible and much more always on and permanent than ever before. And as we start generating owned platforms and as we start looking at earned, that starts taking on a whole new context, because now we don't need to make new stuff if the old stuff is working. How do we change that mindset? And in terms of ecosystems, this is kind of an extension of always on. If we start building up a strategy that is kind of perpetual as long as the consumer stays relevant in those receptivity spaces, you no longer need to keep replacing things as much as tinkering with this machine you've created. That sounds complicated, and I promise you I will try and hopefully paint the pictures in with a couple of examples. So first of all, in terms of storytelling, mapping out how your particular target works throughout their day, what's going on in their day-to-day life, can be a really, really helpful way to start thinking about where these when and where receptive moments are, especially if you're a more casual category. This is something that we've worked with Cara, our media agency, to start building, which is called a channel map. And what you've done here is you've taken all of your data and tried to map it across for the specific segment you're going after. What is the brand impact you're likely to get from a particular touch point, and what is the reach you're likely to create? And this is incredibly helpful when it comes to looking at paid, earned, and owned, to start thinking through, how do I start mapping out the places that really matter? The top right quadrant is going to be the most receptive and the most persuasive, but there might also be some really interesting things like, hey, free trial at events might not be scalable, but it's incredibly persuasive for this particular brand and this particular person. There might be also online reviews starting to peak, which is typically never a factor when we start thinking about our campaigns. But one of the things that's changed for us is, as we starting with receptivity, our whole approach to go-to-market has begun to evolve, to emphasize a lot more things that are hard but still critical. So if I look at this particular brand, we've started spending much more time thinking about how do we get into that recommendation engine? How do we get into where people are looking for advice on what brands to use? How do we get into sampling at experiences that we can do cost effectively at scale? Because this particular person wants their own choice or the choice of trusted external experts to matter, and they're not going to care, no matter how much we spend, on what radio has told them. So it kills a lot of sacred cows to have this kind of data. Not all agencies, for instance, or brands might have this, but being able to map it and start thinking about it independent of your actual media strategy, independent of your campaign or idea that you're trying to drive, starting with when and where they're receptive and starting to think about what are the touch points that really matter strategically to you for either scale, persuasion, or just scale, are going to help start clarifying the choices you make when it comes to investing. And it might make you realize, you know what's really important is, say, earned, but what I need to do to win there is a significant amount of prep work and a significant amount of investment. And that might be what it takes. But all of a sudden you're thinking about how you can be of value and how you can connect to them as a service. And so media touch points become these when and where moments, where people exist in the real world and people discover brands and people are looking for you to tell them what's good. An example from the alcohol industry is most of our consumption very frequently happens in very high energy and high active environments. So clubs, really, really top-end, high-end bars and stuff like that. But when we actually think about it from a when and where receptivity lens, we recognize that that's not the place someone will want to try a new type of spirit. I want to try a new type of spirit when I'm sort of in a much more lower energy environment, catching up with some friends, and where the drink becomes part of the conversation. Oh, and those are usually, say, high-end cocktail bars where it's like, oh, what did you try? Your drink looks fantastic. What's in it? That tastes great. So thinking about your when and where receptive can sometimes dovetail out where the sales happen, or who the sales happen with, and where the actual point of influence and point of focus should be for brand building. And this is a great data and structural way for you to make those sort of splits. So instead of campaigns, what I encourage you to do is, now that you've figured out your framework of receptivity, what content can you put there that converts in context? So you're still I'm not saying that, the one thing I don't want you to walk away with is that I'm recommending that you abandon creativity or abandon great content. It becomes more essential than ever. But instead of focusing on what the brand's trying to communicate and throwing it out at all touch points, you're thinking about, for this specific moment of interaction, what is the kind of thing I want to say that will work in that kind of context? And measuring creativity on its productivity is also something that I'm forecasting will start to happen. How well does the work you've put out to target, say, an awareness space convert people into the next stage? How does that work convince you to the next stage? And as a process of doing this, you'll start thinking about how you make it easy to move people through your path to purchase, literally one step at a time. So if someone's searching for information on product recommendations, what would convert them to the next step? Maybe a free trial, or maybe an opportunity to buy a discounted set. Have you put that link and piece of news into how you activate at that original touch point? And how well is that creative converting people to a trial of redemption? Once they've gone through the trial, what's the next way you talk to them? What do you give them that would incentivize them to, say, make a first purchase? And so on and so forth. You get to that level of granularity as you think about receptivity, and then you start designing creativity for that, and then you start measuring. At this point in time, usually everyone's heads explode because you're thinking, oh my God, there are millions of potential touch points out there. There's billions of things I don't know. And one of the things you're going to have to start getting comfortable with is back in the old days of marketing, we also didn't have the confidence of an AC Nielsen, a rating score. And I'll not talk about how inaccurate I believe those to be anyway, but we don't know a lot, and we've got to start getting comfortable with that. What we do have, though, if we're doing our jobs as marketers, is we know enough about our person that we're trying to talk to that we can start backtracking and building some assumptions. And those assumptions and ideas that we're getting from our creative partners and agencies and media can let us go, we feel like these might be worth doing, and then we can do tests. It's never been cheaper to do tests in market than in the digital era, where for $100 you can line up a Facebook creative, put it out there, measure its click-through, and get it to maybe 500 people. All of a sudden, your entire actual in-market marketing budget can be your consumer research budget as you evolve to what works. So you'll start out with all these ideas at the start of this process. You'll start off with pages and pages of maps of how people can go through your system. You'll go, I have this much money, I can probably really invest into this number of things. Which things should I invest? Let me start with a broad-based test. Let me try a couple of things that I think are a good bet, see if they work. If they don't work, shut them down. If they do work, start reallocating media. And this is what I mean when I start talking about an ecosystem, because what you'll find yourself doing is every month going through your performance. How is every node in my ecosystem doing its job in terms of converting? How much traffic is it generating for my next path? This is an example of an actual document, which is why I've had to black it out. But basically, it's our media and PR approaches, so in terms of our paid, our owned, our earned strategies to activate, what point of receptivity they're trying to target, when they're going to be live if they're paid programs, and what's the projected conversion to the next touch point. So are these assets doing their job? We set assumptions at the start when we have no idea. We're just kind of picking a number and hoping for the best. And then as we get actual data, we replace that with the actual performance. Did it deviate massively from our expectations? Should that mean that we cut those kind of touch points? If it actually exceeded expectations, holy shit, we should totally spend more money on it. That's the kind of conversation that you start doing. And what I'm trying to do here is there's a constant debate happening in marketing between performance and between fundamental marketing. This is the problem with those two camps is they're both essential for today, but they don't have an interconnection. And my argument is this is how you connect performance marketing to fundamental brand building. You start with what you're trying to do and how you're trying to move people forward, and you use the amazing discipline that's created in performance marketing space to help them get there. But you start with the end in mind, and then you build for it and make it more efficient with the performance marketing component. So that's the ecosystem, and what's going to happen for you is every year you're actually going to find yourself going back to the same strategy, the same machine. Maybe one stream of that transference isn't working and you need to pull it out. Maybe a new stream opportunity has come out as you do your marketing business plans every year, so you decide to activate a new stream, test it out, oh, it's working much better, and then you can convert it. But some of those assets might be getting a little old. Okay, let's refresh those ones here, here, and here, and see if that works. We don't know if this asset's really performing. Could we do better? Let's do an A/B test around that specific asset point and see if it's performing. And you're tinkering with this machine as marketers, but constantly moving the base up instead of doing what we do right now, which is throwing out the entire campaign and starting with something new. If you look through and take a step back at most of the big brands that are successful today, whether they be startups or they be major brands, you're seeing a conflagration of tons of stuff that they're trying. Coca-Cola, Nike are not in the campaign world anymore. They just haven't told everyone. They're starting to think about different content tests. If you look at Nike, they have something like 8 different streams across their sports portfolio, communities that they're managing for golf, for soccer, for running, that are totally different and independent because they're trying to talk to specific sub-communities. Nike has major spots, but they'll have a campaign for soccer around FIFA. They'll have another campaign for the NFL and the Super Bowl. And as a consequence, there's no real campaign that the brand launches anymore, and that is a deliberate choice. And as a consequence also, Coca-Cola's, for instance, in its new digital marketing strategy, starting to spend about 30% of its budgets on new and experimental to try and work out what the next future is being, because they recognize that what's working today should get 70% of the budget, but also won't work in 3 to 5 years. So you need a model to evolve off instead of a static place to constantly just replace content for. And hopefully this will start your journeys on building a similar sort of self-evolving model for your brands. The other thing I'll probably talk about is, as a result of a lot of this work, we have recognized a major capability of co-creation. Why do we do co-creation? When you work with partners and influencers, you're accessing a couple of things. One is going back to our what, you're bringing in some cool, right? You're bringing in some cool association. If these brands are having this kind of endorsement, that's amazing. The second thing is you're doing something creative and noteworthy, which gets you a halo of additional earned awareness. When two brands come together, that remains exciting, especially if what they're coming together to do is incredibly creative and incredibly collaborative and kind of just fun, because I like this brand, and they're doing something together. That's awesome. The third thing is it drives authenticity by association. So what you will find as you start doing receptivity maps is authenticity becomes the only game in town, because that's the way you gateway into awareness. If you weren't brought in through something trusted, very frequently it's hard to get in front of people because they don't care. You have to be recommended by a forum. You have to be recommended by a peer review. You have to get great customer reviews from strangers. You have to be recommended by a friend. That remains the best way for brands to become aware. So partnerships is a great way to unlock that. Diageo has a number of partnerships we do. We have World Class, which is the world's largest bartending competition, because no one's a better recommender than someone you're ordering the drink from. That was our winner for this year, by the way, Bunny, who's an antidote and makes a really, really good cocktail. Recommend you check her out. We also have an influencer set that kind of works gives us tools across a couple of different ways. We have our spirits experts, who are a community of whiskey reviewers, very gung-ho experts who do volumetric analysis of casks to determine flavor profiles and stuff like that. But we've also got lifestyle, because we know that that's also how people get recommendations of where to go and how to drink. And building these communities is something we're doing across our portfolio. So unlike a lot of brands that will bring in influencers attached to campaigns, we're seeing influencers and the way to work with influencers as a fundamental capability. And so we're creating an always-on community, which we work with across our entire portfolio to keep them in the loop of what's going on, to invite them to events where we think we need their kind of endorsement and their kind of community, and figuring out ways we can also lean in and support them to give them opportunities that they're looking to do that our brand can become part of. So the collaboration these are entirely unpaid collaborations, which we're looking to do because it's strategically relevant for someone like Matt Ferguson, who's in the top left there, and is the leader of Dramful, a whiskey tasting community and a personal whiskey expert for Singapore. How do I get him early trial of all of our whiskey products so he can fulfill that obligation to his community, he can stay on top of what's cool and trending, and I can give him access with total freedom to talk about it however he chooses to. That editorial freedom with that trust, with that access, means that he always wants to be involved in Diageo projects, and we take advantage of that. With our lifestyle influencers, we offer them their own party access to all of our VIP events, and as a consequence, they get to talk to their community about all the things that they're involved in, which is effortless because it's coming from an access to us and our partnerships with F&B vendors, entertainment vendors, and all of that. We also work with brands. We've launched a partnership capability, which in the last 8 months has unlocked 60 different relationships with brands across the food and beverage and entertainment space, festivals, our bar network, and all of these are in the same vein. We don't pay for sponsorship. We look for strategic collaboration and using our creative collateral to try and unlock relationships. So what we're hoping to do here is become such a great partner to work with across the industry, because we come up with great collaborations, that we get more access to more people, we get to work with more really fun brands, and we get to create better experiences that are awesome for their specific strategies, our specific brands that we're bringing in, and also, and perhaps more importantly, the people that we're trying to talk to. How do these collaborations become win-win-win deals? How do we look for collaboration? This is not easy. This is actually another thing that we've had to do in terms of building almost a new capability in-house at Diageo, where we're looking at, okay, what is your specific partnership objective? What are you trying to do with this festival or this event? How can we come up with brands, stories, and experiences that support that vein? And then how can we tie that into an experience that we think will be collective for both of our objectives, as well as awesome for the people that are attending? This has changed the game significantly to how we typically worked with sponsors and potential partners in the past, which was usually like, here's the price, we'll get your name up there somewhere, and we'll go home. It's also becoming something that our partners as well as us are starting to recognize is a ticket to the game, because sponsorship with just a brand being up there on the marquee is a piece of advertising that everyone's learned to ignore. But doing something fundamentally different and new inside an experience that involves two big brands coming together and doing something really amazing has memory, has Instagrammability, and has a persuasiveness that you can't buy. Game of Thrones is a great example. Game of Thrones was a HBO collaboration that we did just recently to celebrate season 8 and the finale. Every single house had its own tie-up with a single malt distillery from Scotland, picked based on the personality of the house. We tried to match the flavor and the history of the distillery to the actual house involved and the personality that they had. They were custom liquids and they were custom labels. As part of our work in HBO, we collaborated with HBO Asia to make sure that our marketing and their marketing were in sync around the season premiere. We worked with Monarchy, which was a new bar that was opening with a sort of royalty theme that we thought would be appropriate. This was their opening party. We kind of crashed it and did our Game of Thrones tasting for our influencer set at this particular component. So a couple of things happening. Our HBO Asia relationship, our relationship with new F&B outlets through Monarchy, and then our influencer access were all combining to create a component strategy that was bigger than the sum of its parts, right? Because the influencers wanted to be on the top of history, Monarchy wanted something big to launch its event, HBO Asia wanted to appear cool, and so working with a new outlet felt really amazing, and we wanted to make sure we were trying to launch a single malt in a way that was much more accessible than the old world of single malts, guys in leather armchairs smoking cigars. We also did the whiskey, so I think I spoke about the Dramful community, that's me and Matt up there. We did a before press access for the community of Dramful, which is about 20,000 people across Southeast Asia. We brought them in and let them try Game of Thrones before even the press did. I got some angry notes from the media, but the community felt incredibly valued, incredibly excited, and we also took pre-orders at that time. So we had a lot of people picking up the gorgeous collector's set and being able to do it, and a lot of really high skeptics in the whiskey expert region and some really, spirits experts who don't usually like these kind of programs going, actually the liquid was kind of great, getting a lot of endorsement there. And of course with HBO directly, they had a premiere at the Capitol Theater here in Singapore, so we actually supported them with a massive event. Off the back of our collaboration here and how we supported HBO as a partner, we've been invited into unpaid collaborations with HBO for their future launches, so keep an eye out for that. But being a good partner, understanding their objectives and trying to find a way to deliver to them as well as your objectives in a transparent way, leveraging the capabilities you're starting to build like Always On, like the influencer database, all kind of start building this snowball for your business that can bring everything to life. So let me kind of sum up and then open for questions. Nothing about what I just said probably seems easy, and I think that's one of the big learnings that we have to take forward as an industry. We are going to have to get really uncomfortable with how we do marketing in the next year. That's one of the reasons why you're feeling this tension between everything seems like it's changing, but we're not able to affect change. Most of it is because we're trying to look too surface level for solutions. It's not going to be AI. It's not going to be augmented reality. It's going to be a fundamental revisitation of your marketing strategy and then figuring out what technology solutions you should layer in to solve that problem. And if you're not willing to get into the details like that, you're probably always going to feel that you're at a superficial level because you are. Sorry, a bit of tough love in the morning, I apologize. You want to think about how marketing can be useful. Basically, the mental model that I want to see all brands move to that are going to be successful in the next generation are going to be, is this particular thing I'm doing going to be either exciting, welcomed, or useful to the person I'm trying to talk to at the time that I'm delivering it? If the answer is no or maybe, you should cut it, because it's not going to be as effective as something that was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I was looking for. Oh, I wasn't expecting that, but that was actually really cool. That's the emotion that you're looking to deliver, because that's what it takes to make marketing a service. You got to get really granular with your ecosystems moving forward. A media plan that's just an Excel spreadsheet is not going to cut it for brands anymore. You're going to have to get into the details and really start tweaking and think of that literal model and start optimizing as you go. You're going to have to get comfortable. There's a tension between I don't know anything and therefore I can't get started, and as a consequence of big data becoming unlocked, I need to know everything exactly before I do anything. Those are the two traps. You don't want to fall into analysis paralysis. You also don't want to not be focusing on generating data. But there's a middle path where you won't know everything and you still have to act. Test through that uncertainty. Get data through the process of doing things instead of waiting for everything to be perfectly lined up. Because as soon as I have found you get all of that data, the market has changed and all your data is old and obsolete. So if you're not testing and failing forward, you're going to really struggle with that. And look for win-win partnerships, because I think it's the new model to increasing investment. I think paid influencers and I think paid media is on its way out. And I think what's going to start happening soon is we're going to be moving towards a world of partnerships, of content creation and placement that is all about making sure we're delighting people in their personal content universes. I think that's it. So what I'll do is I'll stop now, and Tony, if you can use that right arm to throw some questions around, that'd be great.
Okay, a round of applause for Stuart. What a fantastic presentation first. So questions for Stuart. There must be some out there. We have one already. I'll run.
Nice. I love it when people start asking questions early, so I'm not standing up here feeling stupid.
You ready to catch this? We're trying not to break it this time.
All right.
Right into the box, please.
Does it work? Yeah. Hi, my name is Constance. I work at Friesland Campina, which is a dairy company, so completely different to what you do. And we're in marketing procurement. So my question was actually on, you have all these new things, all these testing, what you're doing. How do you actually get your outside-in information, and how do you work with marketing procurement on that one?
Great question. Because of the fast-moving pace of my marketing procurement person is my best friend. But one thing that you've got to, what you want to do is start with the questions. All right, so if you're working, if in your position you're working with your marketer, get your marketer to start asking the right questions to get set up. Because it's very easy to get paralyzed. This is kind of the big data thing that I was worried about. It's really easy to fall into the trap of I don't know enough, so I can't take any action. The bias should be, what do I know today that can let me move forward in this new method? And then what are the questions that I need to have answers for, and what's the most expedient way to get that closed? So it's almost like taking a startup mentality to this. So there might be, and what he or she should give you is a long-term ideal of, I need to start building these capabilities, these are going to start becoming important. But at the same time, there's a lot more that is available to you than you think, right? Because if you can look at startups who are able to pull out their credit cards and just start buying Facebook and bringing ad management in, if you look at how you can use interns and secondees from agencies to bring in the capability that you need for temporary solutions while you're still, pitching out agencies and stuff like that, you'll start learning by doing. So one thing that really has to happen that I'm kind of is probably the question behind the question that I'm trying to answer here is your brand managers have to start getting really comfortable getting granular with the problem. So, okay, what do I need to do? What exactly do I need to know? And if they don't understand the job of the agencies that they're asking you to bring in well enough to have a semi-intelligent conversation, they first need to probably get to that. Because if they can't have a conversation about A/B optimization in a way that they can understand, they're going to struggle to choose the right agency and engage that agency correctly. So my first point is start with the tools that you have, get the machine rolling, work out how much you're actually going to spend on this sort of stuff, and then you'll get a much more comprehensive brief of this capability with this kind of budget because of this kind of strategic importance, which will help you find the right kind of partner.
But do you expect marketing procurement to stimulate you to think differently?
What do you mean?
So to bring new ideas, to really challenge also your plans that you have based on what is happening in the market.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm getting at here is I don't see the gap being that we don't have the support framework. I see the gap on marketing, and one of the reasons CMOs are having a hard time right now is because we're not setting the agenda. So what I think will help you more is sometimes, and this is a problem that I'm also seeing agencies struggle with, where they're trying to pitch a capability that could be logically really useful for the marketer, but that framework hasn't been set up, so there's no way to plug it in. So the conversation we need to do is stop suggesting really cool toys and start going, what is the actual problem you're trying to solve? Getting that brief and then rolling it forward. Because I think you'll then have more traction with your partner. So part of it might be, and this is something that I encourage if you're in the agency and you're outside of clients, how do you get them to start thinking about that kind of conversation so you end up with a sharper brief about how what kind of problem they're going to solve? Because very frequently the solution ends up being big tech or some kind of new Google product or something, when actually the problem is far more fundamental if we haven't built an ecosystem and started thinking about that. Because if you look at it, a lot of the touch points that we've started emphasizing have been around since the 70s and 80s, right? I'm not saying Instagram's the strategy, I'm saying working with influencers who influence other people is the strategy. Yes, that will start making certain things more relevant over time, but if I told you that as my marketing procurement partner, I think you'd be able to work with that and start coming up with more relevant recommendations, which would mean more of your recommendations would get picked up. I think sometimes we need to put a little pressure on our marketers to be a little bit more in the details and a little bit more across their strategy. And so I encourage you to just push your guy around.
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Cool.
Okay, another question. I've got a quick one for you.
Sure.
So brand experiences and stuff are like, obviously that's great, stuff you were showing us. So I suppose for marketers in the room, where you've got these key stakeholders that kind of want to, when you're going to there talking to them about a budget that you want to spend on a brand experience rather than a budget that you spend on, a paid ad campaign.
Yeah.
How do you kind of get across the potential ROI when you're pitching that to a key stakeholder when they're only interested in the numbers?
So that's a great question, and one of the reasons why, let me go back to it, this slide was so useful. So when I'm saying I want to spend something here, I'm attaching to that a particular productivity target it needs to do. And this solves a number of problems. One problem that we get all the time as marketers is how do you justify awareness spend? If I'm saying the objective of awareness spend is to take people from I've never heard about your product to I would like to sign up for a trial, and then I measure the conversion of how much traffic I'm generating and how many people I'm taking across, all of a sudden I can immediately put value to that. Because it's one part of the overall pie that eventually ends in conversion. We were never able to do this before as marketers, because we never had the tracking tools and technology available to it, but it's now built into every single digital media product that we buy and sign-up product that we do and e-commerce traffic that we do. So it's literally foolproof if you're collecting that data and starting to prioritize it to be able to do that. On experiences, the whole problem of experiences is cost per trial. right? So what you're looking to do there is go, how do I talk about, why am I doing experiences in the first place? We know that that is a higher conversion trial than anything else we could buy, so it is worth it to a certain extent. The other thing you can do is look at how you amplify experiential. So you take an experience, you make sure it has PR working for you, so you're getting earned up to the top of the funnel through third-party endorsement. You're then taking paid media and amplifying that third-party looking content and third-party coverage, so more people are seeing how your brand is cool and showing up amongst an independent source. So whether it be Honeycombers for us, for instance, or other Asia lifestyle magazines, it starts looking cool by association off the experience that we created, and we're inviting people who see that particular piece of content to go into trial. So how you need to build it is you need to be able to show the granularity of a strategy and be able to track that point of view. And the other good news for us as marketers is we can then do that experience and go, oh, this was much higher than I expected, or this was least converting, or this actually was way better, and I can compare two events, which I've never been able to do before. So I can take two experiences, look at the cost per attendance, cost per trial, conversion, and performance of its asset above the line, and go, did it make sense? So part of the thing that we need to do as marketers is start getting comfortable justifying our existence with a robust granular strategy. But then the upside is we now have data that we can use to source more investment. Great question, Tony. It's the headache of the year. Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap up. Please thank Stuart Brooy there from Diageo.